I'm wondering if we can start off with you giving us a little bit of an update of that lawsuit that was filed by your attorney general to force Mike Johnson's hand to swear you in 6 weeks after you won your election.
Yep, we're at 46 days and counting. I would love to talk to y'all about something else, but here we are waiting.
6 weeks after her election, Arizona Representative-elect Adelita Grijalva still hasn't been sworn in because House Speaker Mike Johnson has kept the House in recess to avoid dealing with the government shutdown. In an op-ed this week, Grijalva called Johnson's extended recess shockingly irresponsible. She also noted the only difference between her and every other special election winner this year is that she'd be the decisive 218th signature on a discharge petition to force a vote on releasing files related to Jeffrey Epstein.
I think that what has been decided is the judge has been assigned to the case, and then Attorney General Mays. I think we're all hoping that the House, that Speaker Johnson is going to...
Okay, so imagine this. You're running for Congress. You're out there campaigning, knocking on doors, doing all the normal political stuff. And then one day, the Department of Justice shows up with federal charges. Not for corruption, not for campaign finance violations, not for anything you did in office, but for standing outside an ICE facility and protesting. Yeah, that just happened. The Trump administration just indicted a Democratic congressional candidate and 5 other people for the crime of protesting immigration enforcement. And we're not talking about some random protester nobody's heard of. We're talking about Kat Abu-Ghazaleh, the Democratic candidate running for Illinois' 9th Congressional District. She's facing up to 8 years in federal prison. 8 years for a protest. Let that sink in for a second. This isn't normal. This isn't how democracies work. And honestly, this is the kind of thing you read about in history books when they're explaining how authoritarian governments take over. They start by making examples out of people. They pick someone visible, someone political, and they throw the book at them. Send a message to everyone else. Keep your mouth shut, don't challenge us, or you're next. But before we go any further, real quick, let's be honest. You can't really trust mainstream media anymore. That's why we built Pump Politics, to bring you real stories, real context, and no corporate spin. If you want to stay ahead of the headlines, join our free newsletter. We'll send the news straight to your inbox every day. Just click the link in the description to join. And if you just want to support what we're doing, join us, be part of the community that actually cares about the truth. All right, let's get back to the video.
Congresswoman-elect, you represent a border district, or you will, once you're sworn in, represent a border district. You'll be the first Latina member of Congress from Arizona once Mike Johnson swears you in. What's your reaction to the extreme immigration enforcement from the administration? And I wonder how you think it played in Tuesday's election results.
It's inhumane and cruel, and I think that's the design of this administration and how they are scapegoating our immigrant communities. It played a huge role. I think people are seeing themselves in the families that are being separated.
And look, I know some of you are probably thinking, well, maybe she did something illegal. Maybe this is justified. But here's the thing. The actual charge, obstructing a federal agent, that's it. According to the indictment, she and 5 other protesters blocked the Department of Homeland Security vehicle from leaving the Broadview ICE facility in Chicago. They were protesting deportations. They were exercising what most people would call, their First Amendment rights. But apparently, under the Trump DOJ, protesting deportations is now a federal crime that can land you in prison for nearly a decade. Can you believe this? And the timing here is absolutely wild. We're talking about October 2025. Less than a year before the 2026 midterms. Abu-Ghazaleh is literally running for Congress right now. She's on the ballot, she's campaigning, and the Department of Justice, which is supposed to be independent, which is supposed to be above politics, just hit her with federal charges that could destroy her campaign and send her to prison. Come on. If this was happening in any other country, we'd be calling it what it is. Political prosecution. Targeting opposition candidates. Using law enforcement to intimidate people who challenge the government. But because it's happening here, because it's wrapped up in immigration policy and federal law, some people are going to try to pretend this is normal. It's not normal. And here's what makes it even crazier. This isn't an isolated incident. This is part of something bigger. The Trump administration launched this thing called Operation Midway Blitz, which is basically a massive immigration crackdown targeting Chicago specifically. Federal agents have been flooding the city, and according to reports, they've been getting violent with protesters. Abu-Ghazaleh herself was injured by ICE agents at a previous protest. Other demonstrators got shot at with pepper balls. So let me get this straight. Federal agents injure protesters, shoot at them with less lethal weapons, and then turn around and charge the protesters with obstructing federal agents? Are you kidding me? This is wild. And look, I'm gonna be real with you. This story goes way deeper than just one candidate getting charged. This is about the Trump administration testing the limits of federal power. This is about criminalizing dissent. This is about what happens when a president who's already threatened to go after political enemies actually starts doing it. Because remember, Trump's been talking about this stuff for years. He's talked about prosecuting his opponents. He's talked about using the Justice Department to settle scores. He's talked about cracking down on protesters. And now, in his second term, with nothing left to lose, he's actually doing it. And Kat Abu Ghazala, she's just the beginning. So yeah, buckle up. Because what we're about to break down in this video is going to show you exactly how dangerous this moment really is. We're going to look at what actually happened at that ICE facility. We're going to talk about why this indictment is so unprecedented. And we're going to connect the dots to show you where this is all heading. Because if the DOJ can indict a congressional candidate for protesting, then nobody's safe. And I mean nobody. Whether you're a Democrat or Republican, whether you agree with these protests or not, you should be terrified about what this means for free speech in America. This is the government saying we can charge you with federal crimes for exercising your constitutional rights. We can ruin your life for speaking out against us. We can destroy your political career for challenging our policies. That's not America. That's not democracy. That's something else entirely. Let's get into it. All right, so let's back up and talk about what actually went down here. Because the way the Trump administration is framing this and the way the media is covering it, there's a lot of confusion about what really happened. Here's the basic timeline. The Broadview IC facility in Chicago. That's where immigration authorities detain people before deporting them. It's been a flashpoint for protests for years. And under Trump's second term, with Operation Midway Blitz ramping up deportations, the protests have gotten bigger and more frequent. On the day in question, Abu Ghazaleh and a group of other activists showed up to protest. According to the indictment, they blocked the Department of Homeland Security vehicle from leaving the facility. The DOJ says this act of blocking the vehicle constitutes obstruction of a federal agent, and under federal law, that can carry up to 8 years in prison. Now, here's where things get interesting. First of all, blocking vehicles during protests, that happens all the time. Climate activists do it. Labor unions do it. Civil rights protesters have been doing it for decades. It's a standard form of civil disobedience, and usually what happens, you get arrested. Maybe you spend a night in jail, maybe you pay a fine, but federal charges, prison time, that almost never happens. But the Trump DOJ isn't treating this like a normal protest. They're treating it like a serious federal crime. And they're specifically targeting a congressional candidate. That's the part that should scare everyone. Because think about what this means. If you're a Democrat running for office and you've ever participated in a protest, the DOJ can come after you. They can dig through your past, find some moment where you technically violated some federal statute, and boom, you're facing years in prison right in the middle of your campaign. Like, how is that not election interference? And by the way, Abu Ghazaleh addressed this directly. She put out a video right after the indictment dropped. She called it a political prosecution in an attempt to silence dissent, a right protected under the First Amendment. She's not wrong. The First Amendment is supposed to protect your right to protest, your right to speak out against government actions, your right to challenge authority. But what good is the First Amendment if the government can just charge you with obstruction whenever you exercise those rights? This is the loophole they're exploiting. They're not saying you can't protest. They're saying, well, if your protest inconveniences a federal agent in any way, that's a crime. If you block a vehicle, even temporarily, that's obstruction. If you make it harder for ICE to do their job, you're going to prison. Can you see how dangerous this is? And let's talk about the broader context here. Because this isn't just about one protest at one ICE facility. This is part of a pattern. Operation Midway Blitz, the program behind all this, is Trump's massive immigration enforcement operation targeting Chicago. Federal agents have been conducting raids, separating families, detaining people en masse. And when protesters show up to challenge these actions, the federal government is responding with violence and criminal charges. Remember, Abu Ghazaleh was injured by ICE agents at a previous protest. Other demonstrators got shot at with pepper balls. This is the environment we're talking about. Federal agents are escalating force against protesters and then charging those same protesters with crimes. It's like they create the confrontation, they use violence, and then they blame the protesters for being there in the first place. And here's the thing that really gets me. The Trump administration has been laying the groundwork for this for months. They've been talking about protesters as criminals. They've been framing immigration activists as dangerous radicals. They've been building this narrative that anyone who opposes their policies is somehow threatening public safety. It's classic authoritarian playbook stuff. You demonize your opponents, you criminalize dissent, and then you use law enforcement to silence anyone who challenges you. And it's working. Because now other activists in Chicago are probably thinking twice before showing up to protest. Other Democratic candidates are probably wondering if their past activism is going to come back to haunt them. The chilling effect is real. That's the whole point. The Trump administration doesn't need to arrest every single protester. They just need to make an example out of a few high-profile people, indict a congressional candidate, threaten her with 8 years in prison, let everyone else imagine what could happen to them, and suddenly protests get smaller, opposition gets quieter, people start censoring themselves. This is how you suppress dissent without technically banning it. Now, let's talk about the legal side of this for a second, because some people are going to say, well, if she broke the law, she should face consequences, and okay, fine. Let's examine that argument. The charge is obstruction of a federal agent. That's a real law. It exists for a reason. If you physically assault a federal officer, if you prevent them from doing their job through force or threats, yeah, that should be a crime. But is that what happened here? According to the indictment, the protesters blocked a vehicle. They didn't assault anyone. They didn't threaten anyone. They stood in front of a vehicle to prevent it from leaving. That's civil disobedience. That's protest. And historically, prosecutors have had discretion about whether to charge people for this kind of thing. Most of the time, they don't, because it's not worth it, because it's a protest, because we live in a country that supposedly values free speech and the right to challenge government actions. But Trump's DOJ is using that discretion differently. They're choosing to prosecute. They're choosing to go after a congressional candidate. They're choosing to send a message, and that choice, that's political. You can't convince me otherwise, because here's what we know about Trump's second term so far. He's been threatening to prosecute political opponents since day one. He's talked about going after people who investigated him. He's talked about using the Justice Department as a weapon. And now we're seeing it happen in real time. Kat Abou-Ghazaleh is just the most visible example, but there are others. The DOJ has been issuing subpoenas to activists. They've been investigating protest groups. They've been treating opposition to Trump's policies as potentially criminal. This is the infrastructure of authoritarianism being built right in front of us. And the scariest part? A lot of people don't see it because it's happening incrementally, because each individual case can be rationalized, because the Trump administration is good at framing this stuff in ways that sound reasonable. Oh, we're just enforcing the law. Oh, these protesters broke federal statutes. Oh, we're protecting our agents from obstruction. Yeah, right. But when you zoom out and look at the pattern, when you see who they're targeting and when they're targeting them, it becomes pretty clear what's really going on. This is about power. This is about control. This is about making sure that anyone who challenges Trump's agenda pays a price. And Kat Abou-Ghazaleh, she's paying that price right now. And think about this for a second. She's not some fringe radical. She's not advocating for violence. She's a congressional candidate. She's participating in the democratic process. She's running for office because she wants to make change through the system. And the system is now trying to destroy her for it. That should terrify everyone, regardless of your political views. Because today it's Abou-Ghazaleh. Tomorrow it could be a Republican who protests something the next Democratic administration does. The precedent being set here. It cuts both ways. Once you normalize using federal law enforcement to go after political candidates, once you make it acceptable to charge protesters with serious federal crimes, you can't put that genie back in the bottle. Okay, so let's break this down into the key things you need to understand about this story, because there's a lot happening here and it all connects to bigger trends in Trump's second term. First, this indictment is about criminalizing protest. That's the bottom line. The Trump administration is using federal law enforcement to go after people who oppose their immigration policies. They're taking normal protest activities, stuff that's been protected by the First Amendment for decades, and they're treating it as serious federal crimes. Blocking a vehicle during a protest, that's civil disobedience. That's how protests work. Martin Luther King Jr. blocked streets during civil rights marches. Labor activists block factory gates during strikes. Environmental protesters block pipelines and construction sites. This is standard protest activity. But now, under Trump's DOJ, that's obstruction of a federal agent. That's up to 8 years in prison. And once you set that precedent, where does it stop? If blocking a vehicle is obstruction, what about chanting slogans that federal agents find intimidating? What about organizing protests that make it harder for ICE to operate? What about posting on social media to encourage people to show up and demonstrate? All of that could potentially be charged as obstruction under this new framework. That's terrifying. And here's what makes it worse. The law they're using, obstruction of a federal agent, that's incredibly broad. It gives prosecutors massive discretion to decide what counts as obstruction. And when you have a politicized DOJ, when you have a president who's openly hostile to his opponents, that discretion becomes a weapon. Think about how that power can be abused. Any protest that inconveniences any federal agent in any way could theoretically be prosecuted. That's not a legal system. That's a system designed to crush opposition. Second, this is election interference. And I don't say that lightly. Kat Abu Ghazali is running for Congress. She's a candidate on the ballot. The 2026 midterms are less than a year away, and the Department of Justice, which is supposed to avoid even the appearance of political bias, just hit her with federal charges that could destroy her campaign. Even if she's ultimately acquitted, even if these charges don't stick, the damage is done. She has to spend time and money fighting this case. She has to deal with the stigma of being under federal indictment. Her opponents can attack her as a criminal. Voters might be scared off by the controversy. Come on. If this was happening in another country, if a government was indicting opposition candidates right before an election, we'd be calling it authoritarian. We'd be questioning the legitimacy of that election. But because it's happening here, because it's wrapped up in immigration policy, some people are willing to give it a pass. We can't do that, because think about the implications. If the DOJ can indict Democratic candidates for protesting, what stops them from finding other reasons to charge opposition politicians? What stops them from using their investigative powers to dig up dirt on anyone who challenges Trump? The Department of Justice is supposed to be independent. It's supposed to be above politics. But under Trump, it's becoming an extension of his political operation. And that's dangerous, no matter which party you support. Because once this precedent is set, it doesn't matter who's in power. Every future administration will have this weapon available to them. Every president will be able to point to what Trump did and say, well, if he could do it, why can't I? And suddenly, we're in a world where law enforcement is just another political tool, where indictments are handed out based on party loyalty, where running for office against the incumbent party means risking federal prosecution. That's not the America we're supposed to be. Third, this fits into Trump's broader pattern of targeting political opponents. This isn't new. Trump's been talking about prosecuting his enemies for years. During his first term, he was supposedly held back by advisors and legal constraints. But in his second term, he's got loyalists running the DOJ. He's got people who are willing to use law enforcement as a political weapon, and we're seeing the results. The DOJ has issued subpoenas to activists. They've opened investigations into protest groups. They've been going after people who oppose Trump's agenda, and now they're indicting a congressional candidate. This is what it looks like when a president actually follows through on authoritarian threats. And here's the thing, this is just the beginning. If the Trump administration can get away with this, if there's no political backlash, if the courts don't step in and shut this down, then it's going to get worse. They'll indict more candidates. They'll charge more protesters. They'll expand their definition of what counts as obstruction or domestic terrorism or whatever legal framework they're using. The infrastructure is being built. The precedents are being set. And once that infrastructure is in place, it's really hard to dismantle, because future administrations will look at what Trump did and say, well, if he could use the DOJ that way, why can't we? And suddenly, we're in a world where every administration uses law enforcement to go after their political enemies. That's not democracy. That's not the rule of law. That's something much darker. It's a system where power protects itself, where the government can crush anyone who challenges it, where speaking out becomes a crime. And once you go down that road, it's almost impossible to come back, because every administration that benefits from these tools has an incentive to keep them. No one wants to give up power. No one wants to voluntarily limit their ability to go after opponents. So the system just gets more and more oppressive over time. Fourth, we need to talk about why Chicago specifically. Because Operation Midway Blitz isn't happening everywhere. It's focused on Chicago, and there are reasons for that. Chicago has been a flashpoint for immigration activism. The city has sanctuary policies that limit cooperation with ICE. Local officials have been pushing back against Trump's deportation agenda, and there's a strong network of activists and community organizations fighting deportations. So Trump's response? Flood the city with federal agents, bypass local authorities, conduct massive enforcement operations, and when people protest, charge them with federal crimes. This is about breaking resistance. This is about showing that local opposition doesn't matter. This is about demonstrating federal supremacy. And it's working to some degree, because even though there are still protests, even though activists are still showing up, there's now this fear hanging over everything. People know that if they get too visible, if they're too effective at disrupting ICE operations, they could end up facing federal charges. That's the chilling effect in action. And Chicago is the test case. If Trump can break the resistance there, if he can intimidate activists and local officials into backing down, then he can do it anywhere. Other sanctuary cities are watching. Other activist networks are watching. They're seeing what happens when you challenge Trump too effectively. And that's the message being sent. Don't resist too hard. Don't organize too effectively. Don't make yourself too visible. Because if you do, you might end up like Cadibo Ghazala, facing 8 years in federal prison. That's how you crush a movement without banning it. You just make the cost of participation too high. You make people afraid. And fear is incredibly effective at silencing dissent. Fifth, let's talk about what comes next. Because this story isn't over. Kat Abigail still has to go to trial. She's pleading not guilty. She's fighting these charges. And how this case plays out is going to have huge implications. If she's convicted, that sends a message to every activist and every Democratic candidate in the country. Protest at your own risk. Challenge Trump's agenda, and you might end up in prison. But if she's acquitted, if the courts rejected DOJ's legal theory, that could actually limit Trump's ability to use this tactic moving forward. So this case matters. Not just for Abu Ghazaleh personally, but for everyone who cares about free speech and the right to protest. And in the meantime, we should expect more of this. More indictments, more federal charges against activists, more efforts to criminalize dissent. Because Trump's DOJ has made a calculation, they think they can get away with this. They think the political benefits, intimidating opponents, suppressing protests, demonstrating power, outweigh the risks. And honestly, they might be right. Because where's the backlash? Where are the congressional investigations? Where are the court challenges? Where's the mass public outcry? It's happening, but it's not enough. Not yet. There are some Democratic lawmakers speaking out. There are civil liberties organizations filing legal challenges. There are activists organizing in response. But is it enough to actually stop this? That's the question. So here's what you need to take away from all this. The Trump administration is testing how far they can push. They're seeing what they can get away with. They're building the infrastructure to suppress dissent and target political opponents. And Kat Abigail is the test case. If they can indict a congressional candidate for protesting and get away with it, then they can indict anyone for anything. As long as they can find some legal justification, that's the world we're heading toward. And the only way to stop it is to pay attention. Call it out. Demand accountability. Support the people who are being targeted. And make it clear that this kind of political prosecution is unacceptable in a democracy. Because if we don't, this is just going to get worse. Trump's second term has shown us that he's willing to push boundaries. He's willing to break norms. He's willing to use government power against his enemies. And unless there are real consequences, unless people actually stand up and say no, he's going to keep doing it. The question is, are we going to let him? Are we going to accept that this is the new normal? That federal law enforcement can be used to crush political opposition? That protesters can be charged with serious federal crimes for exercising their constitutional rights? Or are we going to fight back? Because this moment, this indictment, this is a turning point. This is where we decide what kind of country we're going to be. Are we a democracy where people can challenge their government without fear? Or are we something else? So yeah, that's the story. A Democratic congressional candidate facing 8 years in prison for protesting deportations. The DOJ criminalizing dissent. Trump's authoritarian playbook in action. And this is just the beginning. Stay tuned because I guarantee you we're going to be covering more stories like this in the coming months. This is the new normal under Trump's second term, and it's only going to get crazier from here.